Commission meeting for November 7th, 2022. Can I have the roll?
Andre Spinelli.
Here.
Jared Gardner.
Here.
Radhika Krishna.
Here.
Jim Winchester.
Here.
Scott Poulos.
Here.
Jeff Ron.
Here.
Randy Eber.
Here.
You have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda are the minutes from October 3rd. Is there a motion to approve? Motion by Commissioner Eber, seconded by Commissioner Winchester. Any objection? Okay, that motion passes. The minutes are approved. Next item are disclosures. Commissioner Eber?
In case 2022-0104 pertaining to Eklutna Services, I've done work for Eklutna Services as an appraiser in the past. I have no anything financial to gain from this particular case, and I have not appraised anything on this property.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Eber. Commissioner Poulos?
Yeah, I do have a disclosure. I was absent from the October 3rd meeting and will abstain from voting on the consent agenda.
Commissioner Winchester?
I also was absent from the October 3rd meeting, and I will abstain from the consent agenda.
Commissioner Krishna?
No disclosures.
Commissioner Spinelli?
Nothing.
Commissioner Ron?
No disclosures.
And no disclosures for myself either. Moving on to the consent agenda, we have one resolution for approval. Is there a motion to approve? Moved by Commissioner Krishna, seconded by Commissioner Ron. Any objection? Seeing no objection, that motion passes. And next item on our agenda, on the regular agenda, is case 2022-0128. This is not a public hearing. And is there a presentation from staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Christine Bonnell with the Planning Department. I'm here with Ms. Courtney, and I just want to remind you that you did get a memo along with the 2023 CIP, and there is some proposed findings in that memo from staff. And as you're listening to the presentation, just keep those in mind in case you want to add something to them or edit those. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Courtney Peterson, Director of Office of Management and Budget. I would just go over a quick highlight of the 2023 proposed general government operating budget. You will notice that there are 5 departments that are proposed bond project funded in this year's 2023 proposed budget. It includes fire ambulance, fire trucks, AFD, facility improvements, road improvements, park improvements that include playgrounds and trails. Additionally, there are road improvements and transit bonds that would match federal funds. The total bond proposal at this time is $41,595,000. That amount is slightly below the amount that is expected to be paid off in 2023 of $41,650,000. The administration is leveraging other outside funding sources to address some of our infrastructure needs. One of those items is currently on the Assembly agenda, which is AR 2022-332, and is an appropriation of $15.65 million for additional fire trucks, additional facility needs, as well as additional AWARN projects. Included in the memo that was transmitted on October 14th was a list of the bond funded projects and some details that were included in those. So if there's any questions related to any of the projects or any other questions on the 2023 capital improvement budget. Okay.
I think we might have some coming, we're just given. Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, through the chair. I have a couple of questions. I'll try and space them out and let other commissioners jump in when they're ready to. I'll start off with a specific one. PM&E, noticing that it's the most heavily weighted component of the proposed budget projects, not surprisingly, within the PM&E department. Specific questions around the ARDSA sound barrier retaining wall replacement, which is reflected on PME page 47, and the 46th Avenue retaining wall, Fairbank Street to Gamble Street, PME 23. Just caught my attention that the same photo is used for both. It looks like there's a proposal to replace this specific retaining wall, and that photo is also used to generally describe another line item. So can you just help me make sure that we're not double funding the same project with two separate line items there?
I am going to defer to our Public Works Director, Ken Colhase.
Thank you.
It's not, there's a green, it should be a green sticker, you can just touch, there you go.
There we go. Okay, thank you. Through the chair, Kent Colhase, Director of Public Works.
And if you, I'm sorry, it doesn't pick it up very well.
Speak into it.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, Kent Colhase, Director of Public Works. Thank you for the question. I haven't looked at the pictures, and it would take me a minute to find them. I suspect we made a mistake on the pictures. We do have two separate projects. The project off 46th Avenue is a small retaining wall that is in state of failure, and it's potentially damaging a private parking lot behind that wall, so we want to repair that. The sound barrier project is an ongoing project to replace sound barriers along the major collector and arterial streets to provide noise barriers for the residents who live adjacent to those streets.
And if I may ask a follow-up for that line item for the sound barriers, are there specific sound barriers that have been identified to support the line item cost that's identified in those in 2023 and out years, or is it, how did you come to that amount?
There are. I couldn't give you a list right now. I can sure get that information for you. That's developed mainly by MOA Street Maintenance. The street maintenance crews know which streets, which sound barriers are in the worst state of repair, and they identify those. The funding, although it comes to PM&E, street maintenance manages a lot of those contracts on their own. So I'd be glad to get that information for you, Commissioner, but I don't have that in front of me.
I appreciate the offer. It's not, the answer to my question is not weighing on whether or not I approve the motion tonight. So thank you.
Commissioner Ron.
Did I give commissioners enough time to jump in?
I think so, I think you're good.
Okay, thanks. Second question is around sources of funding. I believe I saw an increase in request of state funds this year. Can you give a little more context about why that might be?
Yes, and I think I identified some of the funding that we received this year. So it is from the state legislative that we have now started receiving some state legislative grants. And so our intent is to try to leverage that as much as possible and start making those requests. So, we're kind of in that if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. And so if they're going to offer grants, we're going to ask for as much as we can. So we will be putting forward a state legislative program. I believe our Deputy Chief of Staff is currently working on that and will be submitted to the Assembly either later this month or early December.
Commissioner Winchester.
Yeah, I was looking at the funding for the Anchorage Golf Course. It looks like there's about state funding for about 4 or 5 years of steady projects out there. Can you talk to some of the improvements going on out there?
We haven't seen funding for the Anchorage Golf Course come through in quite a while, so these are deferred items that have been coming through, and so basically, we're looking at about 6 years' worth of projects that would keep that facility kind of repaired and available for users of the golf course.
Do you know if is that going to run through PM&E, or is that like the leaseholder of the golf course taking those on?
It would probably run through our Maintenance and Operations Department, who oversee the facilities through the municipality.
Commissioner Krishna.
Yeah, this is a more general question. In years past, we often see facilities funding requested for items such as libraries or municipal buildings. I didn't notice many of those items this year. Could you talk a little bit as to why and the funding sources for those sorts of ongoing maintenance projects necessary for public facilities?
Yes, thank you for the question. We did identify some facility needs, and of course, we prioritize those. And the highest priority came with the facility roof replacements, in which we included in a separate appropriation that's currently the resolution that I had mentioned earlier. And so there are facility requests in that, and that is the roof replacements for, I believe it is 3 separate buildings. And then additionally, the A-Warren project, and that has a little bit of a facility component to it. The other piece of the facility that is included in this bond is the AFD facility improvements, and that's under the fire department and not under the maintenance and operations department.
Thank you.
Yes.
Question. Can you explain what A-Warren is?
Sorry, I get used to just saying it. It's the Anchorage Area-Wide Radio Network. So it is our internal radio network that all of the municipal departments utilize, as well as the public safety, so police and fire as well. So we maintain our own radio network. It is interoperable with the state and the federal government.
And I guess just as a procedural question, you're looking at this point for just a recommendation from the commission, is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Commissioner Ron.
Thank you to the chair. Another project-specific question around maintenance and operations. The largest line item there is Chester Creek Sports Complex. I have a fairly short tenure on this board, and apologies if it's a project that's familiar to others on the commission, but notice that as part of it, there's relocation of Mulcahy Baseball Stadium, which leaves me wondering where is the proposed new location for that stadium. So could you offer up a little more context and information, questions around current status of parking, what's driving that? Is that fixed duration over a long term, or is it based on current use of nearby facilities? And what's the longer term vision for how this project fits into planning of the baseball stadium for the community?
Thank you for the question. I will actually have to defer to our Parks and Rec director, who had another engagement and was going to be a little late on this particular item. I am not familiar with all of the details. I do know that this is something that has been requested over multiple years, and there is a plan that they have been looking at, but I do not know the details of that plan. And hopefully we can refer to him when he gets here.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any kind of pending questions here. I think we could just look for a motion. I guess page 2 of the memorandum in the front includes, I think, the suggested recommendation and some proposed findings for consideration. Commissioner Winchester.
You know how much I love this. In the case of 2022-0128, I recommend approval of the proposed 2023 capital improvement budget and the proposed 2023 to 2028 capital improvement program to the Anchorage Assembly.
Thank you, Commissioner Winchester. Your motion is seconded by Commissioner Krishna. Commissioner Winchester, you're welcome to speak to your motion.
Oh, I think we have a nice bond theology here, where we're keeping the level of bond indebtedness similar to what we're retiring. I think it's a good program that's been well thought out and presented to us, and therefore I think we should support it.
Thank you, Commissioner Winchester. Okay, seeing no one further in the queue, we'll just go ahead and call the vote. It's 7 votes in favor, that motion passes. Okay, next items, we're moving to the public hearing cases. Just before we begin, I'll read the procedure by which the public may speak to the commission at its meeting. After the staff presentation is complete on a public hearing item, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the commission rules of procedure. Petitioners, including all of his or her representatives, will receive 10 minutes. Part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representatives of groups such as community councils, PTAs, etc. will receive 5 minutes. Individuals will receive 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except commission recommendations to the Assembly which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the clerk's office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. I guess the first and only case we have on the agenda for public hearing is case 2022-0104. Can we hear a report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oklutna Services is requesting conditional use approval to expand the Rock Alaska Quarry in Chugiak. The Rock Alaska Quarry is in the planned community district, and natural resource extraction is permitted by right in this district. The Skookum and Moosehorn quarries border the north and south boundaries of the Rock Alaska Quarry. The proposed expansion is 46 acres of land within 5 tracts totaling 233 acres in the R10 district. Natural resource extraction is a conditional use in the R10 district. The existing driveway onto Old Glen will stay the same. The expansion of the quarry would occur over the next 20 years. The project area will be set back approximately 165 feet from No Name Creek, which is located south of the petition site. The Rock Alaska Quarry is a source of hard rock that is needed for certain construction and road building projects. The quarry is open when there's a project needing this specialty rock, which is unlike a gravel extraction operation that remains working continuously until the ground freezes. State and municipal reviewing agencies have no objection to the expansion of this conditional use. The state and municipal reviewing agency comments can be found on page 157 of your packets. There were 102 public hearing notices mailed to the public, and on October 10th, 2022, 6 responses were received from the public, one of which is in a supplemental that was laid on the table this evening. And the others you can find on page 171 of your packets. The Chugach Community Council did not provide any comments. In regards to the approval criteria, number 1, consistency with the comprehensive plan, the standard is met. While the zoning and land use designation are residential, development of housing is unlikely because of the very steep terrain and the lack of infrastructure such as roads, water and sewer, electricity and natural gas. The R10 district requires a 7.5 acre minimum lot size and 300-foot width with an average slope of 30%. The cost of public infrastructure would be high in this area because of the slope of the land and the lack of existing infrastructure. In short, the construction and infrastructure challenges make it cost prohibitive to develop it for a large lot, single-family housing. The buildable lands map in Acreage 2040 identifies most of the petition site as significantly or prohibitively constrained from development. That's on page 21 of your packet. The 2006 Chugach Eagle River Comprehensive Plan has a number of goals that support the project: the economic development, natural environment, land use, housing and residential development, commercial and industrial development goals of the plan. Approval criteria 2, consistency with the zoning district. Natural resource extraction is allowed in the R10 district with a conditional use permit, and this would meet the the district-specific standards. Approval criteria 3, consistency with the use-specific standards. This is also met. The Urban Design Commission approved a variance with UDC Resolution 2021-001, granted a variance to allow natural resource extraction on slopes greater than 10% in the R10 district. This application is to expand the existing Rock Alaska natural resource extraction. Access to Old Glen would remain the same. All disturbed areas would be stabilized in accordance with the restoration plan. The nearest residential neighborhood is unlikely to see a change in their view sheds because of the topography of the site, which is northeast of the creek and over 500 feet away. Approval criteria 4, site size, dimension, shape, location, and topography are adequate for the needs of the proposed use. This is met. The existing Rock Alaska Quarry is permitted in the PCD district. The site size, topography, location for this expansion are adequate for natural resource. The 5 parcels that make up the conditional use are 233 acres, of which 46 would be used for this operation. Gravel operations typically operate 6 days a week. This would be on a project specific because it's not a gravel operation. And only needed for certain projects requiring specialty rock hardness. The project area grading address the need to the project area and grading plan address the need to mitigate external impacts on nearby residential properties. Approval criteria 5, the proposed use will not alter the character of the surrounding area in a manner which substantially limits, impairs, or prevents the use of surrounding properties for the permitted uses in this underlying zoning district. This is met. The conditional use for natural resource extraction expands Rock Alaska by 46 acres over the next 20 years. The property is owned by Eklutna and unlikely to be developed for residential because of the steep topography and the lack of roads and utilities. Approval criteria 6, compatibility, compatible with uses allowed on adjacent properties. This standard is met. The surrounding area has a history of natural resource extraction and other industrial uses. The natural resource operation is compatible with adjacent properties in terms of hours of operation, traffic generation, noise, and dust. The hours of operation would be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday, which is unlike gravel operations, which usually operate without limit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All on-site equipment is required to be muffled with white noise alarms or motion detectors for backing up. Eagle River Street Maintenance, DOT, and the Municipal Traffic Department have no objection with the continued use of the existing driveway and the amount of traffic generated from this site. The Health Department found no noise and air quality concerns. The approval criteria 7, any significant adverse impacts anticipated result from the use will be mitigated or offset to the maximum extent possible. The standard is met. The site size and operation plan are suitable for natural resource extraction. There are several other industrial uses neighboring this site. They are the Hilltop Recycling, Reliant Transportation, Moosehorn Quarry, Skookum Quarry, Klondike Concrete. Significant adverse impacts on neighboring properties are mitigated to the extent possible by maintaining a 500-foot buffer from the nearest home. There will not be an increase in traffic from the site. Approval criteria 8, vehicular access to the petition site will continue to use the existing driveway onto the Old Glen Highway, which is the current location. There will be no change to the truck hauling route. Old Glen is a Class 3 major arterial in the official streets and highways plan. Approval criteria 9, appropriately located with respect to existing or planned water supply, fire, police protection, etc. This is met. This is located in Chuyak, Eagle River, Birchwood Rural Road service area and the police service area. It's outside of the building safety area and the municipal fire service area. In terms of the use-specific standards for natural resource extraction, this site plan and project complies with those. I just want to highlight a couple in terms of the use-specific standard dealing with explosives. It says, in addition to the submittal requirements for conditional use, a blasting plan and a safety plan shall be submitted. So specific blasting plans are to be written for each occurrence that explosives would be used. There's no blasting plan that applies to all activities. So the applicant's provided an example blasting plan. Blasting plans are required prior to each time that they're used. They're not required to be submitted each time to a reviewing agency. However, records are required to be kept by the owner and contractor to provide to the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration. Screening. L3 screening landscaping is required abutting residential zones. The site shows the retention of 50 foot or more of existing natural vegetation around the project area. This exceeds the code requirement of 30 feet with the L3 screening landscaping. Retention of the mature natural vegetation is better than any new plantings, and it's the code preferred way of dealing with landscaping. Water table information. The applicant's Appendix 4 has a geotechnical memorandum which found that 8 of the 9 tests did not encounter groundwater. One of the test pits had water seeping into it at a depth of 10 feet below the ground surface, directly above the bedrock. Appendix 5 of the applicant's application submittal contains a groundwater memorandum which found that the proposed expansion would not affect groundwater nor surface water running to No Name Creek located south of the petition site. The extraction operation is not to pose a hazard to public health and safety. So the proposed expansion of this quarry does not appear to pose a hazard to public health and safety. The general area has a history of natural resource extraction dating back a long time. The Dow groundwater memorandum was a desktop level study, found that the quarry expansion is unlikely to negatively impact residential wells in the area. However, homeowners living in the neighborhood located south of the petition site have expressed concern about the quarry expansion. Their concerns are contamination of their private wells and water availability as well. This should be addressed by a condition of approval requiring the applicant to create a well water monitoring program to ensure that private wells are not affected by the project. Condition number 3 addresses this. It states, prior to commencing blasting operations that are related to the natural resource extraction involving removal and sale of material within the conditional use boundary, the applicant will provide a groundwater monitoring program to Watershed Management Services. That's a municipal office. The groundwater monitoring program will include the number and location of monitoring wells, collect baseline well data, testing requirements with analytes to be tested, and frequency of testing. The monitoring shall extend for 2 years after the completion of the blasting operations within the conditional use boundary. So the department's recommending approval of this application subject to conditions 1 through 14 in your packet. These are standard conditions of approval for natural resource extraction. There's one additional one for them to provide a site restoration plan. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your patience and attention.
Thank you. Commissioner Krishna.
Thank you. I'll start with a process question. So we're here for a conditional use approval, and I just want to talk a little bit about the UDC resolution. It seems like, looking at the resolution, which is on page 154 of our packets, that the UDC, the variance request was first denied, then it was reconsidered, and it was approved. But reading the findings, it looks like the approval was to have the Planning and Zoning Commission consider the variance as part of the conditional use request. Is that correct?
I was the planner tasked with that case. I don't recall that. Does it say it in the resolution on a line? I haven't.
Yeah, I'm looking at, lines like, A1, standard C. The standard is met due to the change in the language allowing the petitioner the opportunity to move forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And by allowing the petitioner to apply for a conditional use permit with the Planning and Zoning Commission, the standard is now met. I think I'm trying to follow whether...
Yeah, sure. I can now...
Okay.
Thank you for the prompting me. And so the Urban Design Commission is responsible for reviewing variances from use-specific standards, and they approved, they denied the variance, and then a commissioner changed their mind, and they re-voted and then approved the variance. So the variance was approved, but it's not what you were describing. They approved the variance, which is their authority. In their findings, they wanted to make it very clear that they were not approving the conditional use permit, and that that's the responsibility of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So the authority granted to the Urban Design Commission is for a variance, and conditional use is only with the Planning and Zoning Commission, no other board or commission. And they repeated that over and over again. That was what they wanted to put on the record was that the conditional use approval criteria was responsible with planning and zoning.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question. So the variance request is not within our purview to consider?
Well, according to code, a variance authority is granted by the Urban Design Commission, but so that specific, granting a variance from the use-specific standards that in the R10 district, you either, you're not allowed to have, in the R10 district, if it's over 10%, you're not allowed to have natural resource extraction. They granted that. can the Planning and Zoning Commission's charged with looking at the conditional use standards. Yeah, I don't think the Planning and Zoning Commission would want to second guess the variance approval criteria that was made by another commission.
Thank you for the clarification.
I've got a question about that condition of approval number 3. I guess there were a couple aspects of it that I wasn't really clear how it would work in practice or how it's intended to work in practice. But as a maybe initial question before I get to that, one of the things I was curious about with the language is, it says prior to commencing blasting activities that are related to natural resource extraction involving removing and selling of material. I was wondering if there was some specific reason that was put in there, or if it should just apply prior to commencing any blasting activities, or it struck me as odd, that particular limitation. I didn't know if that was intentional or not.
Through the chair, yeah, that phrasing was intended, there's a desire by the applicant to complete a driveway up to the top of the hill, and that material is not for sale, and so they want to complete that portion of a driveway up to the top of the hill, and that material is not for sale, but when the natural resource extraction for sale occurs, that's when they would be subject to getting approval for this groundwater program.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. And then the 2-year limitation, is that intended to begin after completion of all blasting activities?
So this project is going to go on for a long time, and decades, and they would be having to do annual reports on the state of these groundwater well monitoring. That would happen each year, and then the language is that when all of this project is finished, they would have to continue it even after the project ended for a time of two additional years. But it's sort of a long ways into the future, so it's, yeah.
Okay, I think that's how I read it. I just wanted to confirm. So that,
okay.
That in theory might be, I guess, 22 years potentially, right, under the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other question with respect to this condition was, if it contemplates any, and I don't have a good sense of the role that Watershed Management Services plays and how they evaluate or manage a groundwater monitoring program, but the language just requires that they provide a program to Watershed Management Services, and then that's kind of the end of it. And is there a role that Watershed Management Services or the department or anybody plays in reviewing or evaluating that program, both in terms of how it's originally written up and then in the process going forward over the 20 years, whatever the period of time is?
It's a little bit open-ended in that the program would have to be approved by Watershed Management Services, and we didn't want, in this evening to sort of specific come up with the requirements of the plan, but to leave it to the scientists to figure out, so Watershed Management Services will have authority over what's in the plan and what are the requirements, and the plan will be, developed and submitted to that office by the applicant.
Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest that we would be going through the details of that plan. Yeah. I guess my question was just that I didn't see a specific requirement that Watershed Management Services approve the plan. So I guess step one is if the intent is that, or if the expectation is that Watershed Management Services would be involved in the development of it and would be approving that plan, or if it's just something that is provided to them as it currently reads.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that either. I'll reread this. I think that it would be good to have a phrase that talks about that it must be approved by Watershed Management Services. That was the intent.
Okay, thank you. I see Commissioner Winchester in the queue.
I also had a question on the wording of item number 3 on the department recommendations. And then the last sentence is, the monitoring shall extend for 2 years after completion of the blasting activities. But other work could be going on other than blasting, site work, reclamation that could affect water quality. Wouldn't it be cleaner that the monitoring would go on for 2 years after the expiration of the conditional use? You just tie it to that. You want to speak to that?
No, I think that would be a good change. I see the point that you're making, and I think that that's valuable. Believe it or not, there was quite a bit of time I thought about the wording of this, but darn it all, it didn't get perfect, maybe.
I don't see any other pending questions. We'll go ahead and we'll have an opportunity for members from the public to provide comments. But before that, if the applicant has a presentation.
Good evening. My name is Laquita Chmielowski. I am with Dow. I'd like to reserve 2 minutes for rebuttal. I'm here tonight representing Eklutna for this conditional use permit, and I have representatives with me from Eklutna as well as our watershed engineer and geotechnical engineer. So a little bit of history, as staff mentioned, natural resource extraction for hard rock materials has been happening in this area since the 1950s. In the 1980s, the area was rezoned for the Skookum Quarry and for the Rock Alaska, making the Rock Alaska Quarry natural resource extraction a permitted by right use. In 2019, Eklutna purchased Rock Alaska. They have owned the property surrounding the quarry as part of the Anska Native Settlement Act. They did pursue a variance because, as staff mentioned, in the Chugiak-Eagle River Code, natural resource extraction on slopes greater than 10% is restricted. So they did get a variance for a portion of the properties that they own around the quarry. And the reason this area is so important is that it's one of the only hard rock sources in South Central Alaska. It was actually identified in a DOT 2013 quarry study looking at sources. So you can see the zoning around the site. It is a mix of commercial and residential industrial uses. Just to the west, on the southern portion of the area we're looking at for a conditional use permit, is some partially developed residential, but it is directly adjacent to additional industrial and commercial uses. So we feel that this conditional use permit boundary that we're suggesting is very compatible with the adjacent uses. So as we looked at, when we obtained the variance, we talked to the community and to the UDC at the time and indicated that we would develop the variance area in phases. And so when we looked at this first phase, we took a lot of things into consideration, one of which is the watershed, to make sure that we were not potentially affecting wells and surface water to the south. We also looked at, for the near term, Eklutna would like to build an access road to better access the southern portion of the Rock Alaska Quarry to give them a safer and more efficient access. As staff mentioned, we will continue to utilize the existing driveway off of the Glen Highway, and the hours of operation will be the same as the Rock Alaska Quarry. It is opened on an as-needed basis, and the last time it was opened was in 2019. So why is this area so important? As I mentioned, DOT's looked at hard rock sources across the state. and this was one of the areas that was identified because it meets the hardness specification for the aggregate that they use in pavement. And the reason that's important is because it makes for a harder wearing surface, so maintenance costs go down over time, and they just have a longer lasting product. For this rock source, the next nearest rock source is either, in Southeast Alaska or Iliamna or further north. So as you can all imagine, we've seen rising construction cost, and so if we have to start importing material to serve the South Central area, whether it's for projects or emergency situations, it can significantly impact the cost of construction, which for public projects, impacts all of us. So we did do a watershed study. We found that there were 3 watersheds in the area, and we made sure that for this first phase, we were within the boundary of the watershed that's highlighted in yellow that drains towards the northwest and away from the No Name Creek and the wells to the south. We also are willing to work with the MOA watershed to develop a monitoring well program to further ensure that there are not negative impacts to the wells nearby. So through that watershed study, we found that there were 24 wells on record to the southwest of the proposed CUP site. And the majority of those wells were fed by the upper area that's gravels and silts, so water can easily flow through that area. And then the wells do extend down into the bedrock. One of the things to note is that this area really has low water or no water can be found. And that's probably due to the geology, because that hard rock has less cracks and crevices for water to get into and drain towards the wells to provide water. Most of the wells are also perforated to try to maximize the amount of water that can get into the well to serve the properties. So this cross-section is important because what it shows is that the existing Rock Alaska quarry floor is at about the same elevation as the homes to the southwest. And so the rock that we're proposing to remove over the next 20 or 30 years is the rock that's above that elevation. There's about a 200 to 300 foot elevation change. So not only are we going to have, at the end of 20 years, we'll be approximately 500 feet from the nearest home, we also are still staying well above the surface of where those wells start drawing water from. We also looked at vibration. There was concerns about the vibration impacts. So when blasting occurs, that energy that it makes is very much like dropping a rock into water and the ripples that you see, and that energy dissipates very quickly. And there was actually a study done in the 1990s where they studied blasting impacts to wells, and they actually had some wells that were located within the blasting zone. And what they found is that wells don't typically get damaged by the vibration of blast because they are surrounded by soil or rock. And so they move, they vibrate, but they don't shear or bend or have damage necessarily. So as you've seen in your packet, the intent is to develop this area over time. And so the first thing would be to construct this access road to get to the southern end of Rock Alaska, because for blasting material, you want to work from the top down. And so just provide a safer and more efficient route. And then, of course, over time, you'd see material extraction extend into areas A, B, C, D, and finally E. But again, this is, a long process over 20, 30 years because it really is as needed and when the market demands the material. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Polis.
My questions are on schedule. You guys are going to start basically at the bottom and work up? Is that what I heard? And when are you going to start doing that? Like next summer or in a couple of years? And I'm tying this to the required water well inspections
Sure.
and stuff. That's where I'm going with this.
Yeah, so the immediate need would be to complete that access road to get to the top of the Rock Alaska Quarry, the southern end, because you do want to work from the top down. So you build a Pioneer Road to get to that top piece. So that would be immediate need. There is some blasting that would need to occur for that access road, but as staff mentioned, it's really meant to get the road in. The materials usually pushed to the sides because there are berming requirements. These roads are steeper than what you'd typically drive a vehicle up. And then from there, over time, you know, if there was a project that needed material, then they would want to start processing material to be sold. And Bryce is here from Eklutna. He might be able to speak better to the timing. The access road would, you know, if they get approval, they would likely start that this next year. Bryce, do you have anything more to add to schedule?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Bryce, if you wanted to add anything, if you could come so we could get it in the, on the microphone and recorded.
Sorry, a lot of this is market-driven, so theoretically, if big projects don't come out or the demand's not there, we could spend the next 10 years still on Rock Alaska property. But initially, moving forward into the next season, just for safety and developing this pit, so you don't kind of end up blocking yourself with high walls, is to finish, and it's that very faint orange line there. On the west side of the property, there's an access road that goes all the way up to Area B, which is essentially the top of the existing Rock Alaska property. So you'd make a bench there at about 700 feet, or elevation 700 feet, which would be about 250 feet above the existing pit floor. And then from there, you could then start mining areas C, D, and E throughout there.
And can you just state your last name for the record too, so we have it?
Bryce Hattenberg.
Thank you.
So just quick follow-up, we could see the road going in next summer, basically.
Yeah, if there's a big enough need, and it would help our just the logistics and functionality of the pit, that'd be where we'd like to start. That's
Okay. You'll get your chance, sir. You're going to get up here, we promise. So just to finish that, though, is there any problem with starting the monitoring well soon? I mean, is that an issue if you guys started that this year and got a baseline data going? Does anyone see a problem with that? That's why I'm asking all these questions about schedule.
We could go that direction. My thought would be until we know or until we move over into essentially Eklutna's property, we wouldn't start a well monitoring program like that. But I think too, once you get the road established, then it's a lot easier to get up. I mean, we're talking hundreds of feet of elevation difference here on 45-degree slopes. So once you get that road established and start getting into, because then you're going to have to build roads to the back of areas C, D, and E just to get your monitoring wells and everything started up there. So
I'll stop there and let you guys get a chance too. Thank you.
Commissioner Spinelli.
I think we kind of touched on one of my questions, which was, wouldn't you need to build the road to do the monitoring wells? And I think the answer is yes. And then my other question was, did you guys have a sense of what Watershed would do? The questions we were asking Francis, he didn't quite know the answer to, what the monitoring program review process would be like by Watershed Management? Has any of those conversations been had, or?
We have, for this specific project, no, we have not started those conversations with Watershed. But typically for projects like this, you know, you meet with them, you kind of decide what items are going to be in the monitoring program, how often you're going to have to report, those sorts of things get lined out, and then of course they get to review and approve the monitoring program.
So there is a formal approval then?
Yes.
And then my next question was, Once the monitoring data is done, the yearly report, is that available to the public at all? Or, I mean, I'm assuming these neighbors out here are concerned about it and want to get their eyes on it. Is that available, or is there a plan for that? And that's my final question.
Yeah, I would assume that, anything we submit to MOA Watershed is typically public record. But outside that, we haven't made a plan on how that would be made available.
Commissioner Eber.
My question goes to criteria number 7 being met and any significant adverse impacts anticipated. And I'll go to the end where it says there will not be any increase in traffic from the site, but you guys mentioned that the site will be open during certain periods of time. So I guess I've seen other queries where when they are open up, there are trucks constantly moving and noise and debris on the road. So I don't see, or can you speak to how that criteria is met given those circumstances?
So I'll start answering, and I'll probably ask Bryce to add in. But so there's an existing driveway from the Glen Highway to the quarry that goes through other industrial uses, and so we are proposing to continue to use that driveway. There is truck traffic certainly when there's material being extracted, and I'm sure Bryce has a general idea of how many trucks come in and out. But there's also, a stormwater pollution prevention plan that's in place, and so, we're monitoring tracking and anything as we leave the driveway and go down towards the Glen Highway. So there are a lot of items in place to make sure that we're not tracking onto the main roadway. That traffic is limited to when it's open, and like I mentioned, the last time I was open was in 2019. And Bryce, do you know approximately how many trucks you had in there, were in there last time?
Probably about 20 an hour.
Okay, so approximately 20 trucks an hour when it was open last time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Spinelli.
Yeah, just another follow-up on that. I believe some of the pits in the area are aging out, and so I kind of think of this as the next generation of pits in the area. So, I would suspect that the traffic would be similar to what it was previously, but maybe you could speak to that, because I'm not super familiar with the history. I just know that there's been trucks coming out of that area for a long time.
Yeah, so Skookum Quarry accesses the same kind of drive to get out to the Glen Highway. But you're right. That's one of the reasons that this is such an important expansion is because those pits are, including Rock Alaska, are kind of getting to the end of their useful life. And so if we don't continue hard rock resource in this area, then our next option is to look further out, so southeast Iliamna, further north. I can't speak to how often those other quarries are open, but I would agree it's probably similar to the amount of traffic that you would see if we expanded the quarry.
I've got a couple of questions to just kind of inform me a little bit to the context of some of this. And so I guess as an initial point, do you know what the current distance is from the extraction operations to the nearest residential property?
Let's see. It's from the existing quarries, it's probably another couple hundred feet, maybe 700, 800 feet. And by the time we get to the end of our expansion, we'd be out, we'd be approximately 500 feet.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess more generally with respect to the operations, I don't have a good sense of what they look like. I think I heard you say, I'm not sure who it was, that the last time that that it was in operation was 2019, that something was needed. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, so blasting operations last occurred in Rock Alaska Quarry in 2019 to provide armor rock for the Port of Alaska project.
Okay, and then when something is needed and blasting operations take place, how how long and how frequent is that process, is the blasting process?
So it's really dependent on the amount of rock that's needed. So it could be a short duration if there's just a small amount of rock that's needed, and maybe it's armor rock or it's aggregate. If there was a larger amount, so say, you needed 1 million tons of rock, that's going to take a couple summers to blast that amount of rock. Because, you can't just blast the amount that you need, because you don't always get all the rock, so you have to blast additional amount of rock to get the needed amount.
And what does that look like? You say you have a large need and it's a couple summers. What is the blasting frequency throughout the course of the summer?
I mean, it really varies, but I don't know if you know.
Yeah, I can't, that would, like she's saying, it would depend on the quantities. I'm trying to think, in our Port of Anchorage project, we had a subcontractor in there, and it was once every other every 2 weeks, I think they had a blast. At the most every week, so you'd blast and then you spend the week pulling material out of that site. It also helps if you get this thing opened up, so you're having larger production shots. So right now, where you're working a 20-foot face, if you can get to a 400 or 500-foot face, then it's one shot, more material, less frequency of blasting. And we're blasting typically for armor stones, so you're using as least amount of powder as possible to create the biggest rocks possible. Pulling out the big rocks, and the rest of all the small stuff is just used. We run that through crushers and gravel screens to create hot rock, D1, other various value-added products.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. And then I guess if I don't see anyone else kind of pending, the final question I would just ask, I'm curious, since I expect we'll hear a lot of testimony about the water concerns, and among those concerns, I saw a lot of comments in the packet questioning the report that was done, and specifically, I think, kind of the underlying information that was available to prepare that report. I don't know how familiar you are with those concerns and the comments that we received, but I think it could be helpful if you were able to speak generally to any of those before people have a chance to talk, so that they could address that specifically.
So I'm going to ask Kara to come up, because she's the one who prepared the watershed report. And my understanding was the concern was that it was a desktop evaluation. As I mentioned before, one of the things we were looking at was trying to make sure we were out of the watershed that serves the wells and the creek to the south. And so, Kara, do you want to speak a little more about the report itself?
Kara Chauncey, groundwater engineer for Dowell. Right, a desktop study is a very standard preliminary, preliminary action or study for something like this. The subsurface environment is, because you can't see it, then there's a lot of detailed study that would be needed to understand what's actually going on under there. So that might look like something like geophysics, usually is a tool, or you can just start advancing boreholes throughout the area. That's another way to do it, but before progressing to more detailed studies like this is a way to get an idea of if you have to actually, I shouldn't say have to, or should advance to something like that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'll just add that as that report indicated, one of the other options is to do the monitoring program, and so that would be a logical next step.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Eber.
I had a question following some of the statements we received, and one of them was that they wanted to, potentially that it will not change the effect of the environment, or like how it will look. And I know those are concerns in some of the comments that I read, and I mean, considering how much they want to remove or potentially could be removed, I don't understand how it won't change the landscape.
So for the folks who live to the south, the residents, there really won't be a change to what they see, because there is this big elevation change. There's not only like the horizontal distance, but there's, several hundred feet in elevation difference. So we're suggesting taking out a portion that is facing towards the Rock Alaska and all the other industrial uses. So on the southern side, that hillside's going to remain unchanged.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ron.
Thank you through the chair, Ms. Chmielewski, and perhaps Ms. Shaughnessy as well. A quick clarification on a comment you just made. I want to make sure I heard you. Is the groundwater monitoring program that's addressed in Department Recommendation number 3, is that an alternative to the additional investigation that's recommended in the groundwater study? So it's an either-or scenario, not installation of new wells?
So again, because you don't have because you can't see what's going on underneath the ground, I think that not that recommendation in the memo was almost more for Rock Alaska, in a sense, to get an understanding of those baseline conditions. So as you progress potentially into a study and maybe groundwater conditions alter for other reasons that might not be attributed to Rock Alaska's actions, then they have a nice data set that starts before blasting and then continues into their operations. So is it a recommendation? I think it is I think it's a smart choice for Rock Alaska, as well as identifying, I'll just stop there. I think it's a smart choice for Rock Alaska to put in a couple monitoring wells.
Thank you for that additional information. I don't feel like my question was answered, however. And maybe it's a question of staff. Mr. McLaughlin, when you wrote Department Recommendation number 3, was it in consideration of the installation of new monitoring wells to further the understanding of what's happening below the surface at site and near site? I asked the question, and I can rephrase it if I need to, but maybe you can answer that one first.
Let's see if this answers the question. Entire application and read the part about the study and the recommendation for further study, and I thought that that should become a condition of approval. And if I was one of those neighbors, then I would want a condition of approval requiring this.
And that condition of approval is based on the monitoring of existing wells in the area?
Watershed Management Services has reviewed past groundwater monitoring wells at other natural resource extraction sites, and so I thought that this was an appropriate time or project to have this kind of program where they would submit annual reports on the the quantity of water, the turbidity, these different things to be reviewed by Watershed Management Services to check on whether or not there could be any effect.
Okay, I'll stop my line of questioning now.
Sorry,
Thanks.
I have pretty limited understanding of the yeah.
Sure. All right, thanks.
Go one more. And again, speaking to my kind of unfamiliarity with some of these issues, but with respect to the monitoring wells, what are, and in the context of, as part of a program where you're monitoring during the course of operations, what are the types of things that you might be looking for that would be potentially concerning, and what are the steps that you could take if you do see something that is concerning?
Thank you. Sorry, I realized that. So a byproduct possibly from explosives would be a nitrate. And then also monitoring for basic drinking water analytes that is set forth by the state is a very regular program.
And then, so if you say you see elevated nitrate levels from the explosives, what are the implications of that? And if you stop with the blasting, does that clear out, flush out, or what are the long-term effects of that once you spot it?
So I'm not an expert on the health effects of nitrates. I'm
asking, sorry, I'm not asking with respect to health effects, but just with respect to the water. And, assuming there's some level that's above what you would want to see in nitrate levels, does that stay in the water, or what are the implications in terms of the water quality itself?
Right, it's not let's say it's not like a legacy compound, right? Some other items that are making news lately. So, in terms of their residence time in soils, again, I don't have that information about how long those elevated levels may last in a watershed.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Spinelli.
Looking at the diagram, I guess, could you explain, A, how deep a monitoring well would be, and then where in elevation it would possibly go? And then I guess a third question would be, looking at the geology of this cartoon here in front of me, it looks like what I guess I would assume is most of the water on one side of the hill is going to end up on the other side of the hill, and I just don't know if that's a safe assumption or not.
So, we put this together to kind of give you a general sense of what it might look like at the end of the material extraction. But as Bryce mentioned, when you're mining this material, you're creating benches. And so, there may be a bench that's higher than the quarry elevation. And my assumption would be, based on the conversations that we've had, is that the monitoring wells would be up at that higher elevation. I can't speak to how deep they are. Kara might know kind of a typical depth. But the whole area for the conditional use permit was really meant to capture an area that had a watershed that was going to the north and not draining to the south. Because, the watershed appears to be, that water goes towards the south, plus there are a few folks down to the south that pull surface water from the no-name creek. So we wanted to make sure we were not impacting them. So the cartoon is, trying to show that we're really pulling from the watershed that goes to the north and not the watershed that goes to the south to minimize any impacts to those folks.
Commissioner Krishna.
Are there any existing monitoring requirements for the original Rock Alaska quarry or any of the other sites?
I'm not aware of any, no.
All right, thank you. And one more question, if I may. This is maybe a question that's going to be a little bit hard to answer, so maybe both for staff and for the petitioner. And my intent and where I want to go with this is, if we were to consider additional setback distances or anything like that, is there a separation distance or kind of a area? Right now we're looking at, say, 500 feet from the nearest residential area. From your experience or perhaps from staff's experience, is there a greater distance that might mitigate the need for monitoring or impacts to near homeowners? Is there perhaps a 1,000-foot distance or some other distance that we should have in our minds as we consider the buffer areas between the blasting activities and site activities and residential areas?
Through the chair, Ms. Krishna, the separations between natural resource extraction projects and residential neighborhoods varies throughout the municipality. There's Birchwood Industrial near Birchwood Airport. There was approximately 200 feet between Birchwood Industrial and where they were operating. Loretta French Park was a resource extraction site before it became a park. We have Sand Lake Fill Site and the Lucy Pit, both in were like heritage natural resource extractions in South Anchorage that have come before the commission in modern times. And that there's Track 37 out at Clutina Park Road, Clutina Site 1 out at the native village of Clutina. There's many of these sites all around town, and they have different distances from the nearest neighborhood. I can't speak to which ones had blasting, which ones did not. So it's I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like we've dried up on questions for the moment. Thank you for bearing with us and the information you provided. So we'll open it up to members from the public that wish to testify. You can come forward and state your name for the record, and if you're testifying as an individual or on behalf of an organization. And sorry, I think it got turned off. There's a green button, I believe. You can just touch it lightly. And there you go. Perfect. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Karen Cromry. I am speaking as an individual. I have lived in the Chugiak area for the past 6 years. Our neighborhood is located adjacent to and downslope from the proposed project area. I want to summarize 2 key points tonight. Number 1, the proposed blasting and rock extraction activities could negatively affect our drinking water. Shock blasting practices for rock extraction above our homes can change the fractures in the bedrock and jeopardize our water source, which is from private wells. Petroleum spills and remnant chemicals from explosive charges can pollute the subsurface water over a long period of time. Dow was hired to do a desktop level of study on groundwater resources. To us, this study was not adequate for the following reasons. The study focuses on surface water flow and admits that readily available information related to groundwater quality and potentiometric mapping was either unavailable or inconclusive. Many of the wells existing in our subdivision are actually not recorded in the well tracking system, so their study greatly underrepresents the total number of private wells that are at risk. This report also does not adequately address subsurface flows and how nearby blasting can change bedrock fracturing and affect the flows of water to our wells. My second key point is that Eklutna has not satisfied all of the general use standards required for approval. Under general use standard number 1, the proposed use is not consistent with the Chugiak Eagle River Comprehensive Plan. Their proposed use does not help improve the quality of life by minimizing air, water, noise pollution, and it does not protect our homes from incompatible land uses. Eklutna repeatedly states that because there's existing hard rock mining in the area, their proposed operation won't add any more noise or impacts to our homes. In reality, Eklutna would bring hard rock mining 2,500 feet closer to our homes and within 500 feet of the nearest home. We already hear and feel the blasts. We hear the drilling rigs and other heavy equipment operating in the existing quarries located 3,000 feet away. Eklutna states that a 500-foot buffer is adequate to protect our homes. We disagree. Eklutna has not met general use standard number 4, and under general use standard number 7, Eklutna has not proven that they know what the potential effects to our drinking water are, and they haven't provided adequate documentation of how they would mitigate these concerns. The Eklutna groundwater report, as has been discussed tonight, is very vague with no details on whether Eklutna will include groundwater monitoring and does not indicate where these would be installed, frequency, etc.
If you had, yeah, okay, thank you. I don't know if we have any questions.
Any questions?
Commissioner Spinelli.
I was just curious if you could tell me anything about the water wells like in the area, like how deep they are and how much water they produce. Maybe just yours, or if you have general
It varies dramatically depending on where you are in the subdivision and how far up the slope you are. I can speak to ours. Ours barely meets the COSA requirements when you sell and buy a house. It does, but barely. We have a second well 8 feet further away that was drilled later to try to get more water. It's essentially a dry well. We have neighbors up the street, 2 lots up from us, that basically have to haul water because they've never hit water. Neighbors across the street have quite a bit of water. So it's a really dicey thing in our subdivision to try to, if you get water, you want to hang on to every dang drop you get, because if you drill another well, you're not guaranteed you'll even hit water up there. So this is very, very concerning to us in that any changes uphill could really affect how the water flows through the bedrock. And so you asked, like, the depth of wells. I believe our well is 290 feet deep. The bedrock starts at about 90 feet in depth. And so I'm sure some of that water flows through the ground, the material above the bedrock, but I imagine because it goes quite a bit deeper that some of that water percolates through the actual bedrock fractures themselves. Other wells are quite a bit deeper. Some of our neighbors closer to the slope are actually on groundwater, not further in the bedrock. But the concerning thing for me is that in the study that Dow did, they used the well tracking system that's readily available, and that doesn't have all the wells actually logged on it. There are a lot of wells that aren't even accounted for in this study.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Hi, my name's Tracy Riker, and Karen commented on a lot of it, and I can't repeat it better than her, but I can tell you that my home is the 500-foot home, and our property is on both sides of No Name Creek. And when you start blasting, you don't know what the fracture pattern is going to be and whether it's going to affect water that runs north or south. You don't know that. You don't know what the blast pattern's going to be. And the studies that Dow has presented are desktop studies. I think if it was your home, your well, and your water supply, you'd want more than a desktop study. And my understanding was that to get a conditional use permit, that those studies should be provided before they're given the opportunity to blast and drill. I think it is going to affect the character of our neighborhood when you figure they're talking about 700 feet. If you took 700 feet off a flat top, that would drastically change what you're looking at. And they state that we're not going to see it. We are going to see it when you drive down the Old Glen. You're going to see it when you can see what they're doing now. And I'm kind of rambling now, but you know, it's a big concern. You know, we work so we have nice homes, and what happens if you don't have water? You can't sell a home in the Muni without water. We couldn't even sell our property then. Any questions?
I think we've got at least one. Thank you for your testimony. Commissioner Ron.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you to the chair. Ms. Riker, thank you for coming to testify this evening. Did you also submit written comments?
I did.
In your written comment, I believe I see reference to community council meetings in Chugiak. Reference to this was defeated 3 times. Understanding that you're representing yourself here and not a community council, can you provide some more information about interaction with the broader
Yes.
community?
We met several times. The first time we met with Chugiak Community Council, we weren't given the adequate 30-day notice, but we met with them and the measure was passed that that we would not proceed. Also at the Chugiak Community Council, we have voted to request an aquifer study, which has not been done yet, so I don't see how we can say it's not going to affect water when we've asked for money to have an aquifer study. And also at the Urban Design Commission, the first time it was voted no, and then one commissioner changed their vote, and we had to go back again, and it passed.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Michael Floyd. I live on that piece of property that borders the No Name Creek. And Mr. Rayburn, we collected 490 signatures in opposition to this for the first time it was voted down. Eklutna vastly represents the number of wells that can potentially be affected by their actions. By at least 50%. Dow on page 39 states, groundwater wells located southwest of the proposed project area. Impacts include a decrease in well levels due to increasing runoff rates as vegetation and overburden is removed, and contamination may result from blasting processes and newly exposed rock cuts. Dowell is saying right there, this is going to affect the water. They cannot tell us if it's going to affect our well water. You guys asked some great questions about water monitoring, but there's nothing that's been asked about what's going to happen if something is found in that monitoring. Look at Flint Hills and North Pole. Is the state still providing them drinking water? Or is the North Pole refinery still providing those residents drinking water? So in conclusion, this has not been studied enough. If it was your water at risk for your households, you'd want a lot more answers before you even considered saying yes to this proposal. Thank you.
I think we may have a question for you if you want to hang on just one second. Commissioner Spinelli.
Have you had any sampling on your water well recently?
Recently, no, sir.
And there is blasting occurring in the area for years previously, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
But not in the close proximity of what they're proposing to do.
But like you said, you never know how far it could go. Nobody knows what's happening.
Correct.
But there is blasting occurring already, and you haven't sampled it. So I just wanted to kind of play devil's advocate here and know where we're at. It might be good to get a sample.
Hello, my name is Jeffrey Knittel. That sounds a little loud. I live at 16,100 Parksville Drive in Chugiak, and I request you deny Eklutna's conditional use application. A couple of things came up in this meeting. First of all, the cartoon, they're going to clear cut, it says in the documentation they want to clear cut lots A and B. That's going to be visible. That's the top of the hill. And And I'll read my preparation here. I'd like to express my concerns over the conditional use application submitted by Eklutna to expand the rock quarry onto 46 acres at this time, but 233 acres is where we're going. My wife and I purchased a lot in 2018 and built a house, our life savings. And the zoning was secure. There wasn't going to be mining on slopes of 10%. We felt safe in our purchase and our investment in the Anchorage and Chugiak area. And the city, the commission overturned it. And now they're going to put in this giant rock quarry, threatens our water supply. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about our investment. We've enjoyed quiet, the creek, we can hear a creek next to our property right now. Animals come through all the time. All this is going to be destroyed by a loud, noisy, ever-growing rock quarry. We brushed over the topic of the other rock quarries, and yet my engineering friend says, there's a quarry, we got Moosehorn, we don't know how much they have left, we just say that it's end of life. How close to end of life? Western operates a quarry over there, Granite operates a quarry in Palmer, there's a quarry in Portage, there's a quarry in Butte. I think it's Western is investigating quarries up the railway for hard rock use, but all this was ignored, and I understand why, because they're a business and they want to develop their property. But we need to investigate how much of that rock is really there, and is it going to be available for use, or do we just ignore the residences and permit it? That seems like we should do a little more investigation with that. There's going to be dusty, noisy machinery, which is going to be the norm, chemical runoff. I think I've made my point, yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate your
I'm sorry,
testimony.
I'm a little nervous, but it is upsetting that we put so much money into the property and then you go and overturn it. Not you personally, but...
Yeah, we understand that. Thank you very much for coming today and providing your testimony.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kyle Foster, and I work with Eklutna, but before I go, I just want to make sure it doesn't count against any of Laquita's remaining time. Can I speak as an individual?
I think you can speak, yes, as an individual. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
I might be corrected, I apologize.
I think he identified as working for Eklutna.
I work
okay.
with Eklutna, but I'm an individual with the board, and I can talk about my relationship with the board and how they care about their land as an individual.
Eklutna Services, I guess it's, where we're going is we wouldn't want, the applicant to be testifying as an individual, but I don't want to judge, maybe you can explain better.
I just want to make sure I'm not counting against Laquita's time before I start.
I think if you're with Eklutna, we've heard from the petitioner, but thank you.
Okay.
I guess, and I'm open to other thoughts from the board. I've got Commissioner Ron here.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in support of how we seem to be handling this. My concern would be that Kyle Foster is listed as the applicant for Eklutna Services. If there's something in rebuttal that Mr. Foster would like to speak to, then I'd be more than happy to hear that. But again, that being tied to the applicant's time. Thanks.
Okay, anyone else from the public wishing to speak? We've got one more person coming down.
Hello, Tim Potter, myself, now retired, but I've done a lot around South Central Alaska and across Alaska, and there is a sensitive issue about water in the wells, and take into account the history of how long the quarries have been operating there. At 40 to 60 years, many of the homes were built definitely with knowledge that the approvals were in place and the quarries were there. Not all rocks are created the same, and that's one of the imperative items at stake here, is that you're looking at high abrasion resistance material, which all of the specs with DOT for highway and major road projects to try and make them less subject to falling apart and getting grooves worn in them from the tires over the years. If DOT study that was done that was looking for high-grade R3 to R5 resistant rock is correct, really there's a site in South Alaska. There is an undeveloped site by Lake Iliamna, which would cost a lot of money just to get the thing operational. And there's possibly some material at Curry on the railroad track. My understanding of that quarry was that it's been not operated well and is dysfunctional. Granite does have a quarry in Palmer, but I believe that it's closed, or if it's not closed, it's done for only rock for their operations, because it's basically become a pit down into the ground right adjacent to the seismic monitoring area. The cost of the port, which will spec this kind of material, and is the material that went to the port in 2019, if it came from Iliamna, you're probably adding $1 billion to the construction cost to expand and retrofit and upgrade the port so it doesn't fail next time there's a major earthquake and leave 90% of the state's population without a port facility to get all the things we need, including food. So it's very important that there be a successful mitigation measure and concurrence to allow a partial approval, let it go ahead.
Mr. Potter, you got your time there.
And if somebody like Mr. Spinelli could ask me about which way water runs.
I've got a question from Commissioner Spinelli.
I have two questions. Am I correct in assuming the hard rock would have less water fractures in it? And then if you could talk about the hard rock, that would be one thing. That's my question. I guess I forgot the other.
Typically, the metamorphic rock and the fact that it was volcanic material that led up into the area, it's going to be a mixture of those two kinds of rock. They're both tight. The volcanic material is very tight and doesn't have as many typical fractures, doesn't weather very much at all. And I know we all see the turning an arm rock that we drive by every time we go to Girdwood, but that material is so frail and broken that it won't be used, can't be used for that material. So when I say not all rocks are the same, they're really not the same. The performance level is probably such that this blasting activity done at a low vibration rate will likely have no impact on these people's well. If the blasting was done closer on the other side of the ridgeline, closer to their homes, there might be a chance there'd actually be more fracturing and probably an improvement of getting surface water drainage down into the rock that would ultimately lead possibly out to No Name Creek. The fact that they've chosen to end it at
Mr.
the
Potter,
ridge-
sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure I'm being fair with the timelines here. Was your question answered, Commissioner Spinelli?
Yeah, I'd love to, if the board commission was interested, I think hearing what Mr. Potter had to say would be good, but we can't go all night.
I think we got the gist of what you were saying, Mr. Potter. If there's anything specific you wanted to just mention to conclude.
Only that going to the ridge top is like going up to the Continental Divide. Water runs to the west to the Pacific, and water runs east and southeast to the Mississippi and down to the Gulf of Mexico. And that's basically what this ridgeline does with their first phase approval.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I see Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, through the chair. Mr. Potter, by former profession, what discipline did you practice? I've heard things venturing from geology into hydrology and hydrogeology. So obviously a year's worth of experience, but in what arena are we hearing that now?
Education in all of those. My master's degree was in environmental planning and municipal type planning. I've been doing it for 40 years in Anchorage, out of Anchorage, all across Alaska, and have seen and worked with teams of people. The unusual part of my education is that my undergraduate was ecological systems analysis, which included geology, soil studies, hydrology, chemistry, biology. So I have a good understanding, and then have experts or had experts within the company that I worked with and sub-consultants. So I've seen a lot, I've done a lot. I've done an awful lot of planning, and most of the extraction or fill sites, like the Sandlin gravel pits or Lucy pit, or the granite gravel pit up in Birchwood that got environmental awards.
Thank you. If I may have one quick follow-up since you opened the door to it, Mr. Potter. Understanding you're testifying as an individual, you mentioned having retired and a company that you worked for. For the record, could you please let us know what company that was?
Could you repeat that?
You mentioned having worked for a company.
Yes.
With colleagues. We've heard from Dow as petitioner's representative. Would you be willing to share for the commission's common knowledge what company you retired from?
I did at one time, was one of the owners of Dell. Okay. I was bought out 5 years ago. I retired a year ago.
Thank you. Hopefully enjoying retirement.
I have no connection, and damn it, they don't pay me anymore.
Okay. Glad we cleared that up. Thank you, Mr. Potter.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Okay. Last call for anyone that hasn't spoken yet. Okay, we'll go ahead and we've got 2 minutes and 32 seconds set for rebuttal.
So I think a couple clarifications. Someone mentioned that Eklutna owns over 200 acres that surround Rock, Alaska. Of that, the variance was for 87 acres, and there is a sunset date on that variance. And the conditional use permit is for approximately 46 acres of the variance area. We understand that water concerns, we've had a very robust community outreach throughout this process starting back in 2019. So we understand the concerns and why we did the watershed study. I think one of the challenges is that there's limited data, and so the monitoring wells are a good next step to understand the groundwater conditions at Rock Alaska. As I think a few folks mentioned, there has been mining in this area for over 50 years, since the 1950s. We are not aware of any issues with wells associated with the blasting that's occurred with the quarries in the area. And I think we also, we did a geotechnical investigation which also showed that there was hard rock within the conditional use permit area that is similar to what they're finding in Rock Alaska. We did take the necessary steps to show that what we're proposing here would minimize the potential impacts to the neighbors, and why we suggested even in the beginning to phase that variance. And with that, I'll let my remaining time go to Kyle so he can talk about Eklutna's, how they approach their development.
Hello, my name is Kyle Foster, and I just wanted to let you know I'm with the board, in the boardroom all the time. And their own home in Eklutna Village was contaminated. Their water was contaminated. Camp Mohawk, you can look it up. And so there is a big instance in the room and a passion to take care and be good stewards of their land that they now own, and to never leave a land like they received their own village back to them. And so it's very near and dear to their heart, and we're willing to do, would be the only rock quarry in that whole area that does well monitoring. No one else currently does that. And so we're willing to do that to ensure that, to monitor those changes. So thank you for listening and hearing us today.
Thank you. Commissioner Winchester.
We've heard some reports of undocumented wells in the area that were in the program. Do you have a sense for how many wells were not counted in that 24? Is there a guesstimate at what the total number of wells in the area other than the 24 that's reported?
Yeah, I think, we can only go by what's available information. I don't have a good sense of how many undocumented wells are in the area.
Commissioner Pullis.
I'm going to go back to my first question. Is Eklutna willing to do the well monitoring a year or two in advance of their first blasting activities for the market?
I think we'd be willing to do something like that. The only issue, though, with hard rock is you've heard that this rock is very particular, right? It's some of the hardest rock out there. And so if we put a road through and then a project doesn't come along for 10 years and now we're monitoring and sending out everyone to monitor for those 10 years, it's quite a big expense that none of our competitors have to do. So I think we are willing to get that baseline. We are willing to do that, but to have to do it between such large periods of inactivity is a detriment to us compared to anybody else in that area, if that makes sense.
Commissioner Ron.
A follow-up question, Mr. Foster. I appreciate your testimony around the respect that Eklutna has for the lands and the stewardship approach that you spoke to. We've heard community testimony from those, if there is someone that may be impacted, those adjacent landowners are closest to the action, if you will. And we're hearing a few different sides of what's going on here, and maybe some interests that haven't been met through additional discussion or development of a plan or plans. So is that something that you as petitioner could take away and say, listen, rather than moving forward today, we're hearing some concerns, so let's sit down and talk and figure out what we might need to develop in terms of additional detail for monitoring programs and plans and things of that sort. I'm just hearing some concerns that don't seem to be met to me tonight.
This process has been going on for over 4 years. Eklutna has been meeting with the community for that amount of time. I believe, Bryce, we've met with them over 7 times. We've had them into our boardroom multiple times, 2 to 3 times. We've even met with them outside of the community council. We went to their local church and we sat down with all of our staff, and we brought our staff there and explained these issues and heard this out. And so we brought these questions to Dow and the engineers, and we had them research and to the municipality and met all their conditions. And we believe, it is uncomfortable. I'm going to be honest. If I was there, you have a rock core and you don't understand rock. You've never done it. You've never been through the process. It's a little bit daunting, right? And that's why we had him into our boardroom. That's why we met him at the church, and we said, hey, we met with these professionals. We've asked them. We've paid the money. We've tried to do this to meet these concerns. And truthfully, Commissioner Ron, I don't think we'll ever meet the concerns. I don't think we will. I would love to. I really like Karen and Mark. I've met them. They've been around, and just the other people. I know them, and I wish we could settle all their concerns, but I don't think we can do enough studies to meet their concerns.
Okay, I don't see any other kind of further comments or questions pending, so we, I guess we'd look for a motion on the table to get us started. Oh, and before we do that, sorry, a little out of practice, it's been a couple of months. Thank you for the rebuttal information and for answering the questions. With that, we'll go ahead and close the public testimony of the public hearing, and then we can look for something from the commission. Commissioner Spinelli.
Yes, I'll move in case 2022-0104 to approve the conditional use for natural resource extraction, organic and inorganic, subject to conditions 1 through 14 shown on page 16 and 17 of the staff report.
Motion is seconded by Commissioner Winchester. Commissioner Spinelli, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes. I intend to support the motion. I do believe that the concerns that I've heard and the rebuttals from the petitioner have satisfied my concerns. I am open to discussion from other members on maybe possibly additional conditions that would bring them to a comfort level to approve the motion, but I do think that this resource is something that the community needs, and I intend to support. I hope that we can find some way that the commission can support.
Commissioner Winchester.
Yeah, I too intend to support the motion. I have been involved with the former employer with a couple similar projects in the past, and the monitoring well worked out very well for the neighbors and as, you know, the developer of the site to protect our risk management. So I felt like that process was developed with watershed management after we got approval, and it worked out well for all parties. Very similar requirements from the department and the recommendations that I've seen in similar resource extractions in the area. And so I think there's a consistent application of the standard across all these sites, and I'm going to support it.
I guess I'll just jump in because I don't see anyone pending. I'm feeling very torn about this, and I think at the moment I'm inclined not to support it. And I guess my thoughts are, I certainly recognize the need for a quarry for this type of rock, and I support the project in general and would like to see it come to a place where it can move forward. I guess for me, I'm hung up a little bit on this, the groundwater memorandum, and we've heard discussion about, you know, the nature of this rock, and we're aware of the history of the mining in the area, although it's quite a bit further away from the potential extraction that could take place under the CUP. And the concern I have with the memorandum and the information that's actually available here is that the memorandum has a lot of language that's quite equivocal about the potential impacts in the groundwater flow, and I recognize that you're never going to maybe know for sure the impacts of this type of thing, but it sounds like there are some opportunities to do a little further review, at the very least understanding, you know, the wells that might potentially be affected, to even just have a baseline there, and the ground monitoring, and as I'm understanding it, could help maybe ease the mind of someone so long as it stays clean as they see the results on the reports, but that if something comes through, it also sounds like there's maybe a question as to what the implications of that are. And so for myself, I think I feel a little uncomfortable concluding that there's not a hazard to public health and safety, for example, among other potential criteria that need to be satisfied here, without having a little clearer understanding in the materials as to what the expectations are for this change in the proposed scope of the extraction. So I guess I would be interested in just seeing some more review and research and information about that for myself before I felt like I could be comfortable approving it as it currently stands. So those are my thoughts for the moment. Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, through the chair, and Mr. Chair, I appreciate your comments there and share some of those concerns. Struggling with this as well, acknowledging the history of mining in the area and the resource potential that this particular site offers. That on the one hand, and on the other, a lot of the discussion tonight and concern by the community, potentially most affected by the realization of the value of that site. I feel like I could get a little more comfortable with some work on the recommendations, but again, to my prior comment to the applicant, I feel like a gap still exists that I perhaps naively think could be met through a more developed groundwater monitoring program plan that is put forward for public input and the Commission's review. That I think would provide me with a level of comfort around better understanding the potential for impact to public health given the proposed activities. So is there potential for impact? And if there is impact, what is the proposed mitigation? And those are things that I haven't heard.
Commissioner Polis.
I feel like I should probably just reason my way through it also. I see both sides. I completely understand that the rock obtained at this location is very hard to find and very useful and economical for the municipality of Anchorage. I completely understand that. It's hard to compete with, that type of resource extraction available locally. It is a very important resource. I get that. On the other hand, I also understand the water issue, and to be completely honest, I'm a bit suspect of the table desktop study, only because in a quick look today, I thought I was able to determine some surface flow areas that did go towards those houses. And it's not just about Stone Creek. I think when you cut that hole in the side of the mountain, it could impact some surface water additional to groundwater. So that's not saying there's anything wrong with the desktop study. I'm just saying I saw things that I didn't completely agree with. I am totally on the line right now. I would love to approve this project, but I'm trying to think of a way to rewrite this condition 3 here to get a baseline going before you guys go into operations, and that was why I kept pushing on that. Were we willing to start that up a year or 2 early? What I don't want to happen is that happens a month before you guys dig up, and 6 months later something shows up in our well. I'd like a good baseline. I feel like this department recommendation number 3, if we wrote 1 or 2 years at the beginning of that thing, it does establish us the ability to get a baseline going before they just start digging in the ground and selling rock. That's my slight opinion on something we could do to help with that baseline. Just putting that out there.
Commissioner Spinelli.
Yeah, I guess I want to just kind of back up a little bit and walk everyone through my understanding of like how this mine comes to market. And first thing is, they needed their variance from UDC, they got that, and now they need a conditional use from Planning and Zoning Commission. Once they have their conditional use permit, then they can start paying for engineered drawings and getting the permits that they're required by the municipality. So they're going to need permits from the municipality. They need to explore this place before they can, fully get the survey data they need to build any kind of monitoring well reports, groundwater reports, or any environmental reports. They need to kind of get the go-ahead to start, and that's what this step is. After that, the municipality will review it. They're under the jurisdiction of the DEC, the EPA Clean Water Act. I mean, there's laws in place that say you don't contaminate the water, and you don't. So I guess my thing is we have to get them to a point where they can start moving forward with those plans. And I think, and whatever you guys think is you need to gain that comfort level, but nothing happens until they get the conditional use. They don't start making the plans until they get their conditional use permit. Like, we're at square 2 here or something.
Commissioner Ron.
Thank you. So fellow commissioners, and following on Commissioner Polis's commentary about condition 3 or recommendation 3, I'd like to turn our attention to recommendation 11, and that talks about beginning January 1st, 2024, the applicant shall submit an annual monitoring report to the planning department. So that provides a date certain, which is not too far out. If we were to add a C, D, or even E under that with information that we as a commission think would add value in terms of addressing our concerns and community interests, then that may be a place for us to do so. As an example, adding an item 11C, summary of groundwater monitoring program on an annual basis. Well, it's an annual report, so you don't need to add that language, but that's the type of lever that I'm thinking may be at our discretion.
I'll just respond to Commissioner Ron. That's something I would welcome any kind of compromise that could get the commission to an approval.
Commissioner Krishna.
Thank you. I'd also like to draw the commission's attention to, back to item 3, to look at line 5, which does include collecting baseline well data. If the commission wishes, we could make that more specific, but that satisfies my understanding of data, and I think sidesteps any questions about the practicability of the applicant developing roads to collect that data. I would also be supportive of an amendment to the annual report.
Commissioner Ron.
I think Commissioner Krishna just stepped into the void there and provided a solution for the objective that I was looking to target. So thank you, Commissioner Krishna. Given Commissioner Spinelli's willingness for amendment to the motion, I'd be happy to put one forward. So I would move to amend Department Recommendation 11, adding item C, language to read, summary of groundwater monitoring program activities for the prior year, and stop. So that is, again, my objective is that Planning Department will receive information about those monitoring activities. We'll deal with, I guess, deal with them one at a time. So that would be my first amendment.
Okay, amendment. Commissioner Ron, I think it might be the process of being typed up, but to add in 11C that as part of the annual report includes a summary of groundwater monitoring activities for the prior year. Is that correct?
Summary of groundwater monitoring program activities.
Program activities.
Yes.
So I think Commissioner Ron with our system here, oh, okay. I guess we'll call that a motion by Commissioner Ron, seconded by Commissioner Polis. Commissioner Ron, if you'd like to speak any further to your motion.
No, thank you.
I guess if I have an opportunity just to see if, I'll ask staff if there's a, any issue that you would see with adding that to the report that would go to the department?
That'd be fine.
Okay, seeing no further comment, we'll go ahead and call the vote on this motion to amend. Okay, 7 votes in favor, that motion passes. And that's a motion to amend the main motion to add 11C, so we're back to the main motion. And I guess I'll ask a question of the applicant. To Commissioner Spinelli's point about the CUP kind of being needed to kind of help further things along, is there a process or a step in that further development that would lead to some additional information about the nature of the groundwater, to my concern about the report that we have being, at least as I read it, pretty equivocal and not very definitive or confident in any conclusions about the water, not necessarily about there not being contamination reaching the wells. I'm interested in allowing things to kind of continue in some fashion, but I would like to have more information, at least as I'm reading the criteria, as to that particular factor. And so is there something that you might be able to provide, or some process where more information about that might be available? If that question makes sense, I can try to rephrase
Yeah,
it.
I think this is where there's maybe a little bit of a confusion. I mean, that monitoring program would be that next step to get that baseline data and then continue to monitor to see if there's any effects. But there's so limited information in the area, I mean, that's the next step.
And I guess maybe that is the clarification maybe that I need, that I might be missing. When we're talking about the baseline data, and Commissioner Polis, you might be able to help answer this for me. I've interpreted that as like a baseline data with respect to the status of the well on a date X or the water. Or does it provide more information than that with respect to something about the hydrology of the area?
Do you want to speak to that a little bit, Kara?
So I don't know if I exactly got all that you were asking, but so baseline data would be, right, not just water quality, but also groundwater levels in both the shallow and the deep aquifer. So, you know, again, fracture networks are complicated, but so there would be that, let's see, that water level monitoring that would be collected in those monitoring wells would give you an idea of more insight into the hydrogeologic environment in general, if that was your question.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Turning attention back to Department Recommendation number 3. Looking for some improvements there as well. I have some consternation, perhaps because it's my lack of understanding about why the language is phrased the way it is, and Mr. McLaughlin, I appreciate your attempts to explain it, but I'm still not getting it. That first sentence, prior to commencing blasting activities that are related to natural resource extraction involving removing and selling of material. I would like to see that subset of that are related to natural resource extraction involving removing and selling of material removed from that condition. Maybe I'm just not understanding the proposed site activities, but whether the rock is sold or not, it's the blasting activity and the potential to fissure or change subsurface conditions that are creating the potential pathway. So I don't quite understand. Maybe it's something to do with the conditional use that we're approving versus the original activities. Clearly, I don't understand. So if another commissioner or staff could help me understand.
Commissioner Spinelli.
I would imagine they need to do some amount of blasting to get the road in to drill the monitoring wells, but so maybe we should ask the petitioner to verify that. But that would be my guess, why that's like that.
Yeah, if the petitioner has any insight into that, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, that is exactly the case. We know that we need access roads to put in these monitoring wells. That needs to happen before we can get to the potential locations of where the wells would go. So that's why we've indicated that the condition be the way that it is. And the blasting for the road would be much shallower than what you'd see for production blasting for the Armor Rock.
I appreciate the additional information that helps me better understand. I'm still concerned about providing an allowance that doesn't kick off the monitoring program until you can install those potentially upgradient wells. So why not start looking at, sampling existing wells down gradient and gathering some of the baseline data? Is putting in the road for those new wells a necessary predecessor to kicking off other parts of the program? Is kind of the question I'm going with. Sure.
So I guess there aren't any down gradient wells on property. It's not an easy task to try to go to someone's private property to test their well. So that's why normally these monitoring wells are put on property, because you can access them, you can test them when you need them. You have to get permission from someone to go on their property to get that testing. But I'm also, and Kara can probably speak to this more, but I'm not aware of any down gradient wells that currently exist.
Apologies for the loose language there. I threw something out I shouldn't have. Let me rephrase my understanding. There's been no potentiometric map of the site created, so we don't truly have an understanding of where and how subsurface flow is happening.
Yeah, I think there was attempts to use as much available information and data, including the geotechnical report, which looked at the fractures, because sometimes you can tell from the direction of the fractures which way the groundwater is going, but we didn't have anything definitive. So that's why, this groundwater monitoring program makes the best sense. I think that it would, I understand the concerns, but it would be helpful to be able to work with Watershed to really look at this together and come up with the best location for the monitoring wells and all the details that would go into a monitoring program.
And I guess on that point, I'm curious to my earlier question, is there anything about the CUP that's necessary for you to be able to work with Watershed on exactly what you were just talking about?
Yeah, I think that as Commissioner Spinelli mentioned, we wouldn't want to necessarily move forward with the next step because, of course, that requires consultants and engineers and experts coming together. I think it certainly could outline a framework plan, but Eklutna would likely be hesitant to invest in something they don't know is going to be approved, as a conditional use permit. We've certainly taken steps to do the studies to get to this point, but I don't think I don't want to speak for Kyle, but I think there would be some hesitation because there is cost associated with that with no guarantee.
Sure, understood.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Spinelli.
Is there, and I don't do many groundwater monitoring plants, so I'm not super familiar, but what I'm hearing is a hesitancy that, the monitoring program's not going to start right away, and I know there's this whole chicken and egg thing. Is there a way to kind of phase in the monitoring program, like, get step one approved and go drill a well, on the flat part where I'm assuming there's somewhere flat that you could drive a truck onto, and start doing these monitoring wells as you work your way up the hill and phase in this monitoring program. I guess if we could come up with something, if you had an idea on how that would work and the commission agreed, then maybe that would help.
Yeah, so I think certainly there's probably a possibility to phase it. I'm certainly not an expert at the monitoring well and what goes into developing that program, and Kara may be able to speak to it more, but I think that's the whole reason to be able to work with MOA Watershed to develop that plan. I think the fact of having, you know, if you did go forward with, with the amendment as it currently is, you know, we would have to come back at least at 2024 with some sort of framework plan, and if we have the monitoring wells installed, because there's blasting going to be planned in the future, you know, we would have all that information at that point. So I think there's certainly ways to phase it. That first step is really probably meeting with Watershed and determining where the well location should go, what should be involved, you know, what sort of testing should be involved, how often, you know, what that whole monitoring program looks like.
I'm going to just check in with the commission real quick. I realized just now that time has slipped by. Does anyone need a break? Okay, well, let's take getting different. I think we could take just a quick 2-5 minute break, something in that range. Okay, we're back. Commissioner Ron was in the queue. Are you still? Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, on Department Recommendation 3, appreciate the additional clarifications made and discussion. That helps me with what I want to put forward for my second amendment. Propose to amend the main motion for Department Recommendation 3 to read as follows. Prior to commencing activities within the conditional use boundary, the applicant will provide a groundwater monitoring program to Watershed Management Services. The next sentence carries as is. Final sentence, slight change, to read, the monitoring shall extend for 2 years after completion of activities within the conditional use boundary.
Commissioner Ron, thank you for your motion. We might need some assistance. Do you have that written down by chance?
I have, yes, deleted from my copy what I would like to see.
Okay. Did you have a comment relative to that? Well, can you read it again?
First sentence to read, prior to commencing activities within the conditional use boundary. So striking blasting, and then striking that phrase that are related to natural resource extraction involving removing and selling of material. Last sentence, striking the 2 words, the blasting.
Got it. Thank you, Commissioner Ron. Okay, so in condition of approval number 3, we're striking in the first sentence after the phrase prior to commencing everything until, well, I guess it'll be prior to commencing activities, and then you'll just skip right ahead to within the conditional use boundary. That's the first item. And then the second one is in the final sentence, deleting blasting.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your motion, Commissioner Ron. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Spinelli. Commissioner Ron, would you like to speak to your motion?
Just briefly, not to belabor, I think I raised concern around the timing of the development of the program. And I think decoupling this from the blasting activities and the selling of the material at site, we're just talking about the program plan itself, right? And so tightening up to ensure that the applicant is walking through that process with watershed management in a timely fashion, in a way that gives watershed management enough time to review and work through that planning process. So that's the intent of my proposed amendment.
Thank you, Commissioner Ron. Commissioner Spinelli.
I generally support the motion. My only concern is the second half is, when does a land stop having activity on it? And I guess my concern would be, are we signing Eklutna up to have a monitoring program for as long as human activity exists? I guess that's my only concern, is there doesn't appear to be a appropriate stop date. And
That's a well-placed comment, Commissioner Spinelli, and honestly one that I should rethink, and I believe it was Commissioner Winchester or perhaps Commissioner Poulos who may have raised that to our attention initially. So I was trying to wrap that in without a fully formulated thought as to why. So if another commissioner could speak to that concern and perhaps modify if necessary.
Commissioner Poulos, I see you in the queue. Is that?
I do have a comment.
Go ahead.
Okay. I am basically right in the middle of both of you. I think 3 was worded well in that I understand they're trying to get their road in before, basically you got to get a big track rig up to the top and start boring holes. So they have to get the road in first. The way it was worded, I understood, allowed them to get that road up there and then start their stuff, knowing that they might not start mining for 5 years after they get the road in. So I'm trying to run this line between making them just monitor for 20 years versus monitoring around the blasting activity. I was thinking 3, if we wrote 1 year prior to commencing blasting activities, that would basically get a baseline timeline going for them, because we don't know when they're going to start blasting. It could be 10 years. And if they do nothing and we make them do the monitoring well for 10 years and nothing changes, I get their point for that. So what I wanted to try and do was just get them to start a monitoring program 1 year before they started blasting, knowing that they might do some road work and stuff like that prior to that activity happening. So to me, it seemed a little more simpler as just put a timeline at the beginning of that third recommendation.
Mr. McLaughlin, I don't know if you still had a comment relevant to this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Spinelli, I don't think there'll be any confusion about when it would terminate. At the end of a conditional use for natural resource extraction, we record a notice of zoning action saying that the project is complete, all conditions have been satisfied, and the project's over, and then it goes on to its second life of whatever that would be. So the commencing completion of activities, this is talking about natural resource extraction. So natural resource extraction is over, they continue monitoring for 2 years, and then, so it's not signing them up in a loose way for doing well monitoring forever, although that may occur because of the length of this project. But do you know what I mean? Your concern is not, I don't think that to be a problem. And you could ask the applicant that, you could ask Laquita, their representative, but I don't see that as being a problem. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you actually clarified that my concern might have been maybe not necessary, so.
Okay.
I was really had staff in mind of trying to clear it up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's going to be okay.
Commissioner Eber.
Do we have an idea of, I guess I'm gathering from what I've heard earlier, that they're going to have to blast some sort of rock to get the road in, so do we have an idea of how much blasting is going to take place before a well monitor would go in?
Is that a question for the applicant?
For the petitioner.
So we would approximate 1 or 2 blasts, like a couple hundred yards of rock, not tons, which is what is typical when you're doing natural resource extraction.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ron.
Thank you. Commissioner Poulos, maybe seeing a different angle on this recommendation than you and other commissioners perhaps. I see this as triggering the development and iterative process with Watershed Management Services of a program plan. So what will the applicant propose to be doing in terms of its future monitoring? And it not necessarily triggering the immediate onset of that first step in the field of the monitoring itself. And if it would help to clarify, I can add the word plan after groundwater monitoring program plan. But again, that's my interpretation, is that the applicant is required to go through the planning process. And that's something that I want to see done in a timely fashion, not immediately prior to blasting.
So comparatively, just comparatively speaking, in the muni, when you have to put an infiltration or detention pond in, you're required to monitor the water table for 1 year prior to installation of that. And that's so you can get seasonal high and lows in the water table. You know, I'm just trying to establish a way up front before they do things that will seriously impact the water. I don't think putting in the road's going to cause a lot of issues, but as I've stated previously, I think they do have the ability to impact the water. When you start thinking about just Xing out the side of that mountain, chopping the top of the head off, that's going to happen. I saw stuff that it could impact it slightly, and I'd just be like to be proactive and get a baseline going a year before their big efforts. I mean, they should get their road in and be able to get up there and put this plan to work in. But if they build the road and then they go away for 10 years and nothing happens, I don't think that they should have to pay for continuous monitoring when nothing's happening on site, which is why I think a year, you know, prior to the big extraction activities is a good timeline, and it cooperates with, you know, what the city already does regarding other stormwater policies that they have. 1 year is basically kind of their thing.
A question for staff that might help clarify what I'm hearing, or maybe two different concerns as to the process of, to the extent you're able to answer this, how this condition 3 would look, and I guess even going back to some of my earlier questions at the very beginning of the evening, which is that it reads as being designed to provide a groundwater monitoring program to Watershed Management Services, and we talked about maybe having some language that might require their approval of the program, but I'm assuming the actual implementation of the program could be on a timeline that's laid out in the program. Is that reading correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So something I said earlier about condition approval 3 and it lacking the authority by Watershed Management Services to reject the plan or whatever, that wasn't quite right. I just had forgotten that. So Watershed Management, so if this conditional use should be approved tonight, then I'll draft a resolution, the written form of your decision tonight, and then it'll be before you, and then we have a published resolution. The applicant will, you know, run down each of the conditions of approval and, you know, provide a final site grading and drainage plan to be signed off by private development, and then before that they can start blasting, or, you know, however the wording is revised, Watershed Management Services would have to approve, you know, how they will monitor groundwater monitoring wells, how that'll be done, what they'll test for, how deep they'll be, the frequency and that. But what it'll be is they'll provide an annual report to Planning and Watershed Management Services for review. And we've done this in the past with other natural resource extractions. So essentially, I'm looking at the application, seeing the need for this conditional approval. I walk up to Watershed Management Services and I talk to the two heads and say, would you guys be willing to review groundwater monitoring for this site? These are the concerns of the residential subdivision in the vicinity. And they said yes. And we talked about what sort of things they would, you know, could be reviewed. But I mean, Dow will prepare a plan. Watershed Management Services will negotiate it with them, and then accept it.
And so with respect to the particular plan itself, so the current language that we're looking at is requiring this to be triggered prior to commencing activities. And does that contemplate, going through that process with watershed management and then at the same time be consistent with Commissioner Polis's concern, which is that you don't necessarily have the wells in place that you're monitoring 10 years before they do any blasting activities. Could the plan allow for a timeline that allows for the wells to be in advance, 1 year or a year and a half or whatever it may be, even if the plan is developed immediately before beginning activities as the language that we're currently looking at contemplates?
Well, not exactly. While there's flexibility in the writing of the plan, after tonight, which was the objective, but there's some guidelines that are provided here. And so there is a timeline written. It's prior to, currently it's prior to blasting for the natural resource extraction, okay? So that's.
Yes, so we're looking at an amendment that would change that to.
Yeah, whatever it says is what we'll do. Is that?
Well, I guess the question is, we've got two concerns, I think, that we're looking at. One is to have that process start promptly, but the other is to not have a requirement that there be wells in place for what might turn out to be multiple years before any real extraction or blasting takes place. And so what I'm curious to confirm is my reading of it is that if we have language that says you need to do this process prior to commencing activities, that's the trigger for going through the process with Watershed Management Services to develop the program or the plan, but that's not inconsistent with if it takes 10 years before blasting or extraction takes place to still not, even if you have the plan in place, you don't necessarily have wells that you're monitoring throughout that whole period, I guess is my question. I see some commissioners in the queue, so I'll go to Commissioner Krishna.
Yeah, thank you. I hope this question is helpful. I'm personally satisfied by the language, again, on line 5 that says collecting baseline well data. I don't necessarily believe that specifying timelines at this stage of the watershed management plan services process is necessarily helpful on behalf of this commission. I would suggest that we specify criteria to include in that plan that the applicant can satisfy. Perhaps there's more specificity to what that baseline well data consists of, but I would suggest that we keep our amendments to that level so as not to create further confusion in the process.
Thank you, Commissioner Krishna. Commissioner Spinelli.
Yeah, I think we're arguing over whether or not they're going to put the wells in right away and then they'll have to just have them sit there for 10 years. And I just can't imagine that their plan is not to get these monitoring wells in ASAP so they can be ready to blast if the job were to arise that needed them to blast. And then I guess, so once they've spent the money to install these wells, the cost of monitoring is, I gotta imagine, tiny fraction of the cost to build a road up there, drag well rigs up there, drill these wells, and get the monitoring data or the instruments in place. So, I mean, I guess my thought is we should maybe ask them if they mind, because I'm assuming they want to get these wells in ASAP, regardless of when the next job comes.
So I guess we've got pending before us still Commissioner Ron's. Oh.
I just want to say, I feel like I said the same thing you just said. I said 1 year before they start blasting activities, I was okay with the language. So basically, if they did nothing for 10 years, they wouldn't have to do anything. That's what I meant. Like, I'm getting that. They don't want to monitor wells for 10 years that mean nothing. So that's why I'm trying to just say, before you start blowing the mountain up, you should put your wells in 1 year before you just do the major operation. That's all I'm trying to get, is a baseline. I'm still just trying to get a baseline before they install the well and blow the mountain up the next day. That doesn't get you a baseline. And the way this thing reads, it just says prior to. So it feels to me like there's no timeline whatsoever, and that's all I'm trying to get out there.
I guess my impression of the amendments were that prior to commencing activities in any and all meant that, in my mind, meant this well water program is going to start immediately.
And what I originally said was I liked the blasting activities notation. I wanted them to get their roads in and that stuff prior to having to monitor the wells. I get that has to happen.
So I've got a question for the applicant again, just maybe you might be able to provide some clarity on this to make sure we're not misunderstanding the process. So my understanding is we are currently looking at an amendment that would change that condition 3 to require that prior to commencing any activities, that you would provide a groundwater monitoring program to watershed management services. And I'll just say my understanding of that is that triggers, going through the program process with watershed management services, not necessarily a specific timeline on actually drilling wells. Assuming that read is correct and the commission kind of concurs with that, is that something that you see an issue with in your process?
That's what we're about, is not proposing language, but our intent was that we would get a approved water monitoring program prior to blasting, and then in that program it would detail when we needed to start it, how many wells, what it would look like. So that's the intent, is that we'd work with watershed management to come up with an approved plan, and in that plan it'll tell you exactly what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. Say if we're putting in the road, maybe in that plan we look at, okay, if we're only blasting 5-10 feet down to get this road in, maybe the well monitoring program isn't applicable to that. But prior to taking off, 100 feet or 100-foot slice out of this, yeah, maybe you're going to want some 100-foot wells in there to monitor. Maybe instead of going 1,000 feet down, you're monitoring as you take this down, and I guess tiers on a cake, essentially, taking it from the top. But that was our intent, is to work with Dow and the watershed management to kind of figure out what that plan looks like and when it should be implemented.
Okay, thank you. So I guess just to confirm then, if that process were to begin before doing any activities, before you even start the road, the process of developing that plan, you don't see a concern or an issue with that?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we still have before us the motion to amend the main motion brought by Commissioner Ron, which is to change condition 3 so that it would read prior to commencing activities within the conditional use boundary, and then it would also delete the word blasting in the final sentence. Oh, Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and yes, that's an accurate representation of the amendment that we currently have on the floor that I moved and has been seconded. Polling the commission, are we ready to take it to a vote? My amendment has clearly removed the language around blasting, and if that's going too far in terms of separating my objective from what the potential, I don't want to say risk, but the activity that may be of concern here is, then I would welcome pulling that language back in, so long as it's not tied to the removing and selling of material, right? So we've heard from the petitioner they would be willing to look at monitoring around blasting activity associated with development of the road, right? And so maybe I'm talking too much here, and it's getting too late in the evening.
So I'll just say, Commissioner Ryan, I didn't see anything else pending other than your comment. I was just about to call the vote
All right,
on your
let's go
motion.
there.
And I'll just note for myself that I plan to support the motion because my read of it is that it would facilitate immediately beginning the process of discussion with Watershed Management Services. And then that process would result in a detailed timeline and requirements with respect to blasting and everything else. So we'll go ahead and call the vote. Okay, 6 votes in favor, that motion passes. We are back to the main motion as it has been amended. And I guess I'll just comment for myself still for the main motion. I'm still somewhat torn about it. I feel more comfortable that with a advanced well monitoring program, there will be more information that will be available with respect to the hydrology of the area that will provide some of the information that wasn't available in the current report. And so I think that helps my concerns somewhat, although I'm still a little hesitant about not having kind of further insight into the results of some of that initial data and what that means once that happens. But I'm open to other thoughts from the commission. Or if everyone's ready to vote, let me know. Commissioner Spinelli.
I guess I'll just repeat this. I think I intend to support. I'm ready to pass. And I kind of base my faith in the municipality's permitting process. I've done work in the city of Palmer, city of Homer, Wasilla, Matsu Borough, Seward, Unalaska, and various other places, and we have the most robust municipal review process, whether it comes to watershed, groundwater monitoring, and the private development engineering and the planning. So that's kind of where I'm putting my faith, is in our permitting process, and that's kind of where I get my comfort from to be able to feel we can move this forward.
Commissioner Polis.
I'll just note that I intend to support the motion. The amendment to recommendation 3 is a little more robust than I was even approaching, so the groundwater is now covered, I would say. And because of all the reasons Commissioner Spinelli said, I do have faith in the water management system, and they will work this monitoring plan out. So I intend to support the motion.
Commissioner Winchester.
I would just like to, I'm going to support it also. I'd like to circle back to Mr. Foster, and I've been in the board of Eklutna, and I do know that those words were how they kind of view all their developments, that they take very strong stewardship of the land and the neighbors into account when they decide whether to go forward or not. I've seen it in the past, and I think it's true in this case also.
Okay, I don't see any other comments, so we'll just go ahead and call the vote. Okay, we've got 5 votes in favor. That motion passes. Long evening. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with us here. It's the last item on the agenda. Oh, Commissioner Winchester, did you?
Yeah, under Commissioner comments, I just wanted to point out that I'm on AMAT's Community Advisory Committee. Currently, there's a TIP Amendment 1 out of the 2023-2026 Transportation Improvement Program. It'll probably come out next week. There'll be a 45-day public comment period. So if you care about road projects and AMATs, you're going to have an opportunity to comment on the TIP Amendment 1 next week.
Thank you, Commissioner Winchester. Commissioner Run.
Thank you, Mr. Winchester, for that reminder. Will there be particular projects identified in that TIP amendment?
Yeah, it's out. I think the committee, the Technical Advisory Committee just met, and they're going to produce their document and their website within the next few days. So keep a look for it under the, I think it's the Technical Advisory Committee, TIP Amendment 1.
Okay, and we have no meeting next week. I don't know if it was previously announced, if it's a reminder or news to the commission, but no meeting next week. And we'll just look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Eber, seconded by Commissioner Pulis. We are adjourned.